The New Norm is brought to you by Winning at Home. I'm Steve Norman. Welcome to The New Norm. Just this week, a local community organization asked me to come and give a talk about boundaries. And while boundaries and the issue of boundaries is something I've been thinking about for a long time, I haven't had a chance to talk to a group about an issue like this, and it was fun to kind of think it through. So I just want to give you a rundown about some of the lessons I've been learning about boundaries in relationships and at work over the last couple of years. When our kids first learn to play sports, especially sports with a ball, like soccer, football, basketball, it's really important that we explain to them the rules of the game. And one of the first rules are what are the borders of the field of play? What do these white lines at the edge of the soccer field mean, or at the edge of the football field mean, or what do the different lines on a basketball court mean? That helps us identify like the boundaries of the field of play. And I love watching football, and one of my favorite moves that I love to watch in football is when a wide receiver is catching a ball that is headed out of bounds and has the mindfulness and like the mastery over his own body to figure out how to drag both of his toes, even as his momentum is carrying out of bound before they cross the line. So he makes this catch, but he makes it inside of the boundary of the field of play, because anything that crosses that line doesn't count. And one of my favorite authors, Brené Brown, says the easiest way to define a boundary is just this. A boundary helps us understand what's okay and what's not okay. And Brown has this great line. She goes, a lot of times we think that if we identify or implement a boundary, especially in an interpersonal relationship, we're afraid that we're going to hurt somebody's feelings, that we're going to disappoint them, that we're going to come off as a jerk. But Brown says, actually, the research shows that people who can identify and hold on to boundaries for their own well-being and the good of the relationship are people who are actually statistically proven to be more compassionate and more empathetic. When I was in college, the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, I had a chance to work at a Christian sports camp in the South. And a lot of my fellow colleagues, other counselors, were from Texas, Missouri, Oklahoma. I think I actually picked up a Southern accent for a couple months. I did lose it when I came back home. But there was this great kind of 3-word phrase that came up to identify when somebody was crossing a boundary in any of those interpersonal relationships. And it was as easy as this. 19, 20, 21-year-old guys would blurt this out when they wanted to let somebody know that they had crossed the line with their speech or their action. They would just simply say, hey, man, that ain't love. That ain't love. That's a line that has stuck with me ever since. And a boundary is just a way to be able to say, like, when your behavior crosses this line and it causes disrespect to my person or my values, that's unloving behavior to me, and I can't tolerate it in that manner. Again, when we set a boundary, we're never attacking a person. We are calling out a behavior. That's why I love when Brené Brown doesn't say, you're wrong here. She says, that's not okay, meaning that behavior is not okay. When this particular action takes place in this way, in these environments, it causes this kind of harm. And as a result, I have to remove myself from that type of scenario. I remember a few years ago when I was juggling some stress issues at work, a mentor of mine, a guy by the name of Nate Young, says, Steve, a lot of times you experience stress when you've agreed to do something that you don't believe in. A lot of us, we're not afraid to work hard, and we can burn the midnight oil if it's something that we're passionate about or something that we care about. But a lot of times we'll find ourselves resenting the fact that we said yes to a person or a task because we were trying to accommodate them, or because we were trying to people please, or because we were so maybe not confident in who we are and whose we are that we're drawing our identity from how other people view us. When I was working at a church in the Detroit area, I had a dear colleague by the name of Pan, and she oversaw some of our social services department. So every once in a while, she would have people who were down on their luck come to her and say, Pam, I need money so that I can buy gas, or I need money so that I can buy food. And Pam had this amazing boundaried line, and she would always say, there's good news, I can help. If you need money for gas, here's a Meijer gas card. Or if you need money for food, here's a Subway gift card. She was saying, like, I can meet that need, but our corporate policy, our boundary is we don't hand out wads of cash. We'll help you meet that need, but this is the way that we'll do it. And every once in a while, Pam would have people who were super frustrated with her, and they'd yell at her, or they'd slam the door, or they'd hang up the phone, and they would mumble and be upset, and they'd say, that's not what I want cash. And Pam would always come back with a smile and say, there's good news, I can help. Brene Brown calls this generosity with boundaries. And generosity, that compassion, that empathy says like, hey, I understand that you're in a hard situation. I want to help. I can help. Here's what help looks like. And I understand that that might not be the help that you're looking for, but this is the help that I am willing to offer. Another idea around the whole concept of boundaries helps us say, when do I know when I'm helping somebody and when I'm enabling somebody? And the book by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, Boundaries, that came out in 1992, subtitle When to Say Yes and When to Say No to Take Control of Your Life, had a couple of principles that I really appreciated. And they quote the scriptures, the book of Galatians. Galatians 6:5 says this: each one should carry their own load. But in that same chapter, there's another verse, Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, that says, carry each other's burdens and in this way fulfill the law of Christ. And so the question that the authors of Boundaries ask is this: how do you know when somebody's got a load that they are responsible for and when they've got a burden that you should help them carry? And they've got this great image. They say a load, something that's your responsibility. It's like a backpack. It can fit on your shoulders. It might be heavy, but you can carry it. So when our kids are learning basic tasks around the home, they might need some help learning how to clean up their toys or their room when they're young, but eventually they hit an age where they can do that on their own, and they should do that on their own. That's their responsibility. That falls under their purview. And so we can teach them how to do it, but once they know how to do it, that's on them. But then they described a burden as like a boulder. And a boulder is something that no human being was designed to carry alone. They need help. They need somebody else to come alongside of them. So we've got a dear friend and colleague here at the office who recently lost her father unexpectedly to a heart attack. And tomorrow is his memorial service, and a crew of us are going to be going there to share our support. And in our own way, we as a staff team are trying to come alongside her and say, we want to help you bear this burden, this grief that you were never designed to carry alone. Now, of course, she's going to experience that grief in her own way, but we believe that it's our responsibility, our calling, even our privilege to help bear that burden with her. So that language to say, hey, I can't help you carry your backpack. That's yours and yours alone. But if you've ever got a boulder, I'm going to come alongside you and help you figure that out. If you're stuck in a particular situation where you know that you haven't necessarily been identifying or communicating those boundaries, there's kind of 3 steps that I think are important to implementing boundaries for the first time, or maybe re-implementing some boundaries that we have gotten away from. The first one is this: identify your boundaries. Like, where might you need some lines? Where have some relationships gotten blurry? Or where are you feeling codependent? Or where are you prone to get like enmeshed with another person and have their issues become your issues, rather than making sure that your issues are your issues and their issues are their issues? So identify your boundaries. When we moved to West Michigan almost 8 years ago, and we got our puppy, Chewy, who is a big boy now. He's 85 pounds. But we had an invisible fence company come in and bury the invisible fence line underneath our grass in our yard. And then one of the ways that they communicated where the boundary was to our puppy is they put these little flags at about 4-foot intervals so that he could see it. And then when they were doing the fence training, he's also wearing his collar. And when he came within a couple feet of the line, there would be a little tone that would beep so that he would know that he was close. So he could see the boundary because it's got these flags. He could hear when he was approaching the boundary because there was a beep. And then if he decided to cross that line anyway, the shot collar gives him a little zap to let him know that he's not in the space that he's supposed to be in. And I have realized in hindsight that sometimes I get sideways in relationships because I have a boundary in my mind that I have never communicated to the other people in my work or in my home or in my life. So if you have a boundary, make sure that you actually identify that boundary, and then make sure that you communicate that boundary. You can tell a person like, hey, I can work until 5, but I got to pick my kids up at 5:15. So unless there's some horrible, unavoidable crisis, I'm going to be walking towards my car at 5:01. So identify your boundaries, communicate your boundaries. And again, depending on the nature of the relationship, you might not even have to explain why that boundary exists. You just have to explain that the boundary exists. And then finally, and this is where a lot of us get in trouble, especially those of us who are people pleasers or those of us who are very polite Midwestern folk who don't like to step on anybody else's toes. I grew up in Illinois and I live in West Michigan, and there's this rumor that there's this thing called West Michigan Nice, where people, out of great fear of offending anybody else or deference, will refuse to say what they really think or communicate what they really need. And I think that sometimes we get through the first steps. We identify the boundary, we communicate the boundary, and then when push comes to shove and we've got an opportunity to actually enforce the boundary, sometimes we fold because we feel uncomfortable. It's like saying, hey, here's my out of office email. I'm going on vacation next week, and to say, hey, I'm not going to be available, but if you need me, you can contact so-and-so. Well, if somebody sends you an email and you continue to check your email and you respond to your email on the first day of your vacation, what you're actually communicating to everybody who's on the other side is, that's not a boundary that I'm taking very seriously. And what we do is we confuse people, just like when we set boundaries with young toddlers and people say like, hey, if you do this, there's going to be a punishment. And then if you realize, I don't really want to, didn't mean it, or it's inconvenient for me to enforce that discipline, that you change your mind, we end up communicating that the boundaries are not ones that we take seriously, that maybe our values aren't ones that we're holding that closely. So, just some random thoughts about boundaries, why they matter, why they're important, how they serve us. Do you know what your boundaries are? Have you communicated those boundaries with crystal clarity to the people that they will affect? And finally, are you enforcing those boundaries? If you're drawing those lines, are you holding them? And if not, what does it look like for you to go back and reevaluate and say, am I not holding this boundary because I've got the wrong boundary? Maybe it's possible for some boundaries to be boundaries that aren't fair to other people, and we might need to rethink how we got to those boundaries. But if I've got the right boundaries and I'm not enforcing them, what is it that I am afraid of? And how do I drill down and say, you know what, it's really important for me to be committed to my own identity, to my own autonomy, to my own kind of spiritual sense of self as it's defined in the Gospels in and through the person of Jesus. And how do I make sure that if that is anchored, I can risk disappointing other people because I want to be available for them fully down the road. So if you've got questions about boundaries, don't feel afraid to hit me up. My email, steve@winningathome.com. The New Norm is produced and distributed by Winning at Home. Winning at Home is a faith-based nonprofit committed to making individuals, couples, families, and businesses stronger through counseling and coaching. For more information, visit winningathome.com. I'm your host, Steve Norman. Thanks for listening.